Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 10 easy art creatures which are really good for you to tame. But just before we get into it, make sure to hit that like button and the subscribe as it will really help me out. In at number 10 is the carb enemies. Now this is a great tame just when you're starting out in Ark, as it is an extremely easy one just requiring a slingshot, and it is an extremely useful one. The carb enemies is really great in the early game for doing any kind of underwater exploring, as it is by far a really easy underwater tame to actually get, and is actually a pretty decent swimmer. Although it is pretty slow on land, this thing can definitely pick up the pace when it comes to jumping into the water, and it can be great for gathering things like silica pearls and oil in the early game when you do not have the skills or materials to actually tame up a fully underwater tame like the Megalodon or the Mosasaurus. The Baryonyx is also a very good shout as well if you did want to tame that creature to use as an underwater tame too, as it works extremely effectively as well. In terms of downsides for the carb enemies, obviously it is quite slow, and obviously its damage isn't really going to rack up, and its saddle is going to use a little bit of cementing paste, but to be honest, it's not really that bad to get that, as it's only like 6 or 10 or 15 cementing paste. It isn't an extreme amount like you'll see later on in the game, where you'll really want to harvest it in some way from beaver dams or using a Beelzebufo. But you actually would be surprised in how much damage the carb enemies can deal. As some smaller creatures, it can definitely do a very good job of killing, and it is okay for fending off things like Dilos, raptors and dodos, but definitely in the damage department, lower your expectations. In at number 9 is the bulldog, a really crucial iteration to Arboration's map, and definitely a very easy tame and a extremely useful one as well. Although cute on the surface and seemingly completely innocent with no use at all, the bulldog has an extremely useful use. When its light is activated, it will have the light pet effect, and reapers and things like namelesses will be extremely debuffed, and I think namelesses won't even come out of the ground when your light pet is enabled. So it is definitely a really great creature to have when you're heading into those deep dark depths of Arboration. In at number 8 is the Thyla, a tame that has been around in Ark for a while now, but definitely an extremely useful one. The Thyla is a tame found in the redwoods of pretty much any map in trees, and you should definitely be careful for them and watch out for them whenever you're in the redwoods, even if you're not trying to tame one, as if these things pounce on you, that could be the end of a very nice Ark trip for you, or a metal run when you're low-lying flying in those redwoods. So definitely be careful and always be on the lookout for these things, especially because these things are very well camouflaged. But once tamed, which can be easily done with a net trap and some darts or a simple trap, these things have the ability to scale up several walls and vertical surfaces, and also have an extremely useful ability for any carnivore to have, which is the all famous bleed ability, which works based on damage percentage instead of just actual damage. So no matter the creature's health, it will still be dealing 25-35% of that creature's health in damage, which is absolutely insane. Sadly, this doesn't all hit in one go, but to be honest, the fact that it only lasts over a 30-second period is still an extremely useful thing to have, as it is still a very quick drain of an enemy's health, and if the damage stat is good anyway and the creature's health is of reasonable level, the Thyla will have absolutely no trouble decimating through multiple Ark creatures in seconds, or bosses in minutes, if it could actually go into bosses. In at number 7 is the Beelzebufo. Now overall, my opinion has drastically changed on this thing over the course of my Ark playing, and just my YouTube content making as well, as I would rarely ever use the Beelzebufo for anything, and I pretty much never tamed one. But over time, you the viewers of this channel has persuaded me to actually try out the Beelzebufo, and I can definitely agree this is an extremely useful tame for gathering all of that cementing paste. Yes, you finally heard me say it. I'd probably say beaver dams are still great if you're in the mid-game stages of Ark, but if you can chill out for a Bilzabufo, definitely do. And also think about breeding them as well, as then those insect runs of those insect caves or wherever you farm insects will be extremely easy and efficient, and definitely worth your time, and you'll be able to gather thousands and thousands of cementing paste. Also, the Bilzabufo is a great underwater creature as well, but to be honest, what would you expect from a literal frog? The Bilzabufo has a wealth of abilities and is an extremely useful creature for so many things. So if you've never used one before, I definitely urge you to try one out. And unlike me, you actually may really value these things in the early game Ark stages. In at number 6 is the Anki. Now obviously the Anki is an essential part of every Ark player's progress, unless you're one of those people that just stops at metal tools and doesn't bother to tame the Dodic or the Anki, and both of those creatures could be on that list, as these things, even though a knockout tame requiring a significant amount of tranks due to their damage reduction, these things aren't actually a very difficult tame, as you can tell, they run really slowly. And if you have something like an RG to pick one up and take it to a different area, or if you just pick one up and put it in a trap, or you just lead it to a trap, this can be one of Ark's easiest tames, and you don't even really have to move around, as you can just put it in a trap and then just simply shoot tranks at it, and you'll have yourself a tamed Anki. And once you have one of these things tamed, you will really enjoy it, as these things are by far one of the best creatures out there for getting all of that metal, compared to the Doedicurus, which will get you all of that stone, which is definitely very necessary, but in my opinion metal is an extremely more valuable resource, and it will gather anything that the pick does on any kind of metal or rock or tree or any of those types of resources. The Anki is really a crucial one and not actually very difficult of a tame. In at number 5 is the Deinonychus. Now, comparative to other Ark egg tames, this is actually one of the easiest ones, as the Deinonychus can very easily be your first tame on Valguero. And for good reason, as these things are very easy to actually tame, and if you have just some basic level of Ark experience, you won't really struggle with these things. You just have to be cautious and just wait and get into the right spot and the right nest at the right time, and then you should be able to escape. You'll probably want things like parachutes as well, just so you can quickly escape off of the cliffs, and then the Deinonychuses should at some point lose you. Or you could always do the strategy of just hiding behind a large creature, and then the Deinonychuses will attack that creature, and then they'll aggro together, and then they'll sort it out between themselves, and you can just go and raid that nest. But I would definitely urge you to be careful, but if you are in somewhat Ark skilled, then you will be perfectly fine with this, and even if you are new to the game, just simply watch some kind of tutorial on how to do it. Trust me, you will not struggle with it. It isn't that bad, and after you have got the egg, it is just as simple as using torches, and you don't need to use air conditioners or anything like that. It's just a really simple, not very taxing on the resource tame, which is very good, as it deals a wealth of damage, deals bleedability to bosses, and also can traverse around the map with great speed and great agility, being able to traverse any kind of surface that you may face on any Ark map. In at number 4 is the Pteranodon. Now this is probably your first flyer that you ever flew on in Ark, unless you're one of the lucky ones that did experience another flyer, or you may have experienced something like the Pelagornis if you went for that route. But all of that backchat doesn't mean the Pteranodon is a bad creature whatsoever, and actually I would argue it is one of Ark's best flyers, as it is just so accessible from an early level, and there are barely any other flyers in Ark which actually have this kind of accessibility and speed. Its only real downsides are when it comes to weight and stamina, as it is pretty abysmal in both of those stats, and you will need to level up that weight and that stamina, and I would even urge you to go for a high level even for your first Pteranodon tame, especially if you have Tranks, which doesn't really seem very accurate for your first tame of a creature. But a low level Pteranodon stam and weight is just so bad, sometimes it is just even completely unusable. If you're carrying 10 wood on you, no, you're encumbered and overweight. Sometimes it is just so bad it is unusable and is not even worth the tame. In terms of the saddle for the Pteranodon though, it can be a bit of a pain, as that chitin and keratin can be a bit of an annoyance to actually gather up, but if you do find a pack of insects or kill a few carb enemies, you shouldn't be too bad, and at the level that you'll be unlocking the Pteranodon saddle, which is 38, you'll definitely have some sort of arc experience, and you really won't struggle with it that much. It just may take a bit of time. In terms of the Pteranodon's PvP use, which yes, it does have one, this thing is extremely useful for raiding bases, as its C-spin attack ability, while yes, can get you across the map really fast, it's really good for raiding inside bases, as it can quickly deal a lot of damage very fast. In at number 3 is the Reaper. This, like many other Arc creatures, is an Arboration tame, and is very highly valued among all of the Arc community. I know no one out there that actually hates the Reaper Queen, unless they are talking about the taming method, which apart from on Gen 2, is an absolute nightmare, unless you have a few tricks up your sleeve, like a trap, and you'll probably want a light pet as well, except for when you're doing the exact taming process, as I'm pretty sure you can't have a light pet out when getting impregnated by the Reaper Queen. And yes, I said impregnated and not tamed, as you're not going to go out and knock these things out and then just tame one. Essentially what you do is get the Reaper Queen to a really low health stat, I think it's under 1000 HP, then you go up to it, it will impregnate you, and then you just gather loads and loads of XP to get at 100% effectiveness, and then at some point there'll be a timer, and then that Reaper King baby is going to be born into the world, and it'll probably kill you, so that's why you'll need Reaper pheromone glands, which is another resource that you get, I'm pretty sure, from killing Reapers. So there is a lot of prep work that actually does go into taming a Reaper, but on Gen 2, Raasclark has a really easy tutorial for it, and it can be your first tame, which is why it is actually on this list, as you may think of the Reaper as a really difficult Arc tame, but with this new taming method that Raasclark has discovered and found himself, it is extremely easy. In at number 2 is the Maywing. This is the first Genesis Part 2 creature on the list, and the only one on the list, as the creature in the number 1 spot is not part of the Genesis Part 2 family. Now, what makes the Maywing such a good tame? And also, how easy is it to tame? And obviously, because this is an easy, great Arc tames list, this thing is relatively easy. The Maywing is a very simple tame, just requiring a net gun or a few simple signposts, and that is all you'll need to trap it, and then just use a few tranks or a club if you feel like doing that, which I wouldn't really recommend, and then you have yourself a Maywing. And this is by far one of Arc's best creatures, and in my opinion, Arc's best travel mount. Just end all, it is just simply the best travel mount. It has so much speed, its stamina drain is near to none, and its weight is pretty decent as well, making it a very top tier travel mount, and it is extremely easy to tame. But it has many other uses as well, like being a great creature for raising up baby creatures, as it is a portable feeding trough. You can also carry baby creatures in its saddle, and it can even steal enemy baby creatures if you're doing a raid in a PvP scenario. And if you're looking for berries, this thing can gather berries too. There's pretty much nothing that the Maywing can't do. And finally, in at number 1 is the Crystal Wyvern. Now you may think Wyverns are an extremely difficult tame. Why am I putting a Crystal Wyvern in the top 10 list? As the Crystal Wyvern is an extremely easy tame compared to the Wyvern. This thing is a passive tame requiring a special kind of crystal found on Crystal Isles, and is by far one of the easiest Arc tames. It pretty much takes no effort at all. You just have to harvest the crystal, then find a Crystal Wyvern. There is a spot on its back where you can stand and then simply sit, and then just passive feed it the crystal, and then you have yourself a Wyvern. And because Wyverns have no saddle, you can access this thing at any level. Obviously, you'll need the wooden pick, but that is literally the first level. And sorry, I meant stone pick there, not wooden pick. This is not Minecraft. And if you do go for the Blood Crystal Wyvern, then you have yourself an even better Wyvern, and it isn't even more difficult to tame. It is the exact same taming method for every crystal wyvern out there. And when you tame one, you'll be very, very glad that you did. As compared to the Pteranodon, which is a similar bracket of accessibility to the crystal wyvern, you have yourself a much faster tame. A tame with reasonable stamina, a tame with reasonable weight, a tame with even more damage, even though the Pteranodon's damage isn't that bad, and just overall a much, much better tame, and also a lot more of an intimidating one. The only downside it really does have is wyverns do not have armor, but with all the better features of a wyvern, it is significantly better. Not to mention that this thing can carry a wealth of creatures the Pteranodon can't. The top 10 best DLC arc tames. In at number 10 is the Bulldog. Now this thing came out when Operation released all the way back in 2017, and it is especially well known for its cuteness. But what actually makes this thing an extremely useful tame, as on the surface, this just looks like a basic shoulder pet that has little use. But this thing is probably one of the most useful creatures on Operation, due to that light on top of its head. And this is an ability it shares with the Featherlight and the Shinehorn, two creatures which you could put in the exact same spot as the Bulldog. It's just the Bulldog is the most famous for it. In terms of its use, essentially what this does is debuffs all of the harsh creatures on Operation, such as Reapers and the Nameless. In at number 9 is the Gas Bags. Now this creature arrived to the Arc scene in 2018, and to people that haven't used it, this may seem like a pretty useless tame overall. It is just a fat thing, it doesn't seem like it's going to deal immense damage. Obviously it doesn't, but its main use is it is such a good travel mount, and it is actually a really great metal harvester as well. Not because it can harvest metal, it's just good at transporting you from A to B, and it has the weight to carry all of that metal along with you. And it doesn't even need a saddle for you to ride it. The saddle is only there for extra armor, obviously, and if you want a second friend to tag along with you on your ride. Also, in terms of flying over longer distances, you'll need to level up your oxygen. Yes, this is pretty much the only flyer where you will want an oxygen mutation, as that will mean that this thing can fly over longer distances. And yes, a normal oxygen mutation on a flyer is some of the worst things you can get, because flyers can't go in water. But oxygen for the gas bags is far more useful than stamina even is. So you don't even need to level up stamina on this creature, you'll just need to hit all of that oxygen. And also the gas bags is an extremely cute creature as well, but definitely one that is very difficult to control, and it is evident from this B-roll that I am no gas bag master. I am absolutely terrible at controlling this thing, and it will definitely take a lot of time and a lot of skill to control this thing properly. And actually, over the course of this B-roll, I ended up dying a significant amount of times. But if you always want to have a little top tip for the gas bags, you can always dismount just before you hit the ground if you have run out of that oxygen, and then your gas bags will take no fall damage. Yes, after all of that you could tame another one, but these things are somewhat of a pain to tame, and you wouldn't want to lose a gas bags anyway. They are just such valuable creatures. In at number 8 is the Snow Owl, and yet again another creature that hit the Arc scene in 2018, and in my opinion this is just slightly better than the gas bags, as it has a lot more uses for PvP and for PvE as well. The gas bags is just such a diverse creature. In terms of its main ability, which people will see and use the most, it shares the glide ability, which it shares with the Griffin, and this ability is extremely useful for zipping across the map with insane speeds. And in the case of the Griffin, it will deal damage. Sadly for the Snow Owl that isn't the case, but you're still going to get all of that speed. And also it is incredibly fun to do all of this as well, which is extremely useful for a creature to be fun as well. Also, it does have this kind of heat-seeking ability, which is really good for you PvP players out there, as it means if someone is trying to raid your base, you can simply track them down with this ability. Or if you've lost a creature that you're trying to tame in a PvE or PvP scenario, you can easily track it down if it is hidden somewhere. Obviously, you could use the Tame Tracker now, but before the Tame Tracker, this was an extremely useful ability for that use case. Also, you're going to want to be leveling that stamina up on this thing too, as when it heals creatures, it will use up all of its stamina, and the more stamina it has, the longer it can heal. But just do take into mind that this thing will heal everything in its radius not just your tamed creatures, and you may want that in the case of if you're healing a creature that you're trying to tame, but you may not want that in the case if you're fighting a boss or enemy creatures. Also, they are insanely useful for farming with gachas, as their owl pellets are some of the ways that you can get absolutely insane loot out of gachas. If you haven't tried that already, definitely try it at some point. Get yourself a snow owl, they're pretty easy to tame, just a basic trap and some tranks. Get a snow owl as soon as possible, they're on pre-order, so you do not need to get extinction to find one of these things. In at number 7 is the Deinonychus. Now this is a creature which can be found on maps like Valguera and Fjorda, and is actually a pretty easy tame, and is definitely well renowned for its insane skills and abilities. Especially the fact that its bleed ability works in boss scenarios, and the fact that it can latch onto large creatures and deal that bleed ability is absolutely insane, as you don't need to worry about that creature pushing your way, you are simply just gripped onto it. And when you add pack buffs and all of that on top of it, the Deinonychus is one of the most powerful creatures in Ark, along with a creature like the Shadowmane. Except compared to the Shadowmane, this is significantly easier to tame, and you can definitely tame it at a much earlier stage, but it may take a little bit more time. Possibly using the tech suit on Genesis Part 2 can definitely be very OP, but I would say you'd probably get the Deinonychus easily before the Shadowmane. In terms of its other uses as well though, this creature is extremely mobile and is great for traversing across the map. Also, it takes no full damage as well, which is extremely useful for a creature. Obviously, you can always use the little hack when you jump off just before it hits the ground, and then the creature will take no full damage and you will take no full damage as well, but it is nice that you do not have to do that every time you do a high jump with this creature, which actually could be a significant amount considering how much parkour this does. It is just an absolutely insane creature, similar to the Rock Drake in the amount of parkour that this creature can actually do. Definitely one that you should tame at some point, and really not a difficult one, just requiring you to steal its egg from a nest and then just using torches to incubate it. In at number 6 is the Reaper. Now yet again, another creature from Arboration is on the list, and even the next creature on the list is from Arboration 2, meaning that Arboration is definitely a great DLC map, and it definitely checks out, as many Ark players say Arboration is their favourite Ark map, along with maps like Fjorda and Ragnarok, all being high tier ones for the list. And actually, thanks to Genesis Part 2, if you do have access to Genesis Part 2, the Reaper can be your first tame on that map. Obviously, on Gen 2 you have the tech suit, which makes it significantly easier, but there is also many spots near where the Reapers spawn where it will deal the damage for you. And yes, the damage is required to get the Reaper Queen to a low enough health so that it will actually impregnate you. But now, instead of you having to deal that damage, there are spots on Gen 2 where a kind of misty fog will do all of the damage for you, which means this thing can be an insanely easy and quick tame on Gen 2. If you want to check that out, just go and check out Raasclark's channel on YouTube, and he has a great tutorial. Just probably search for Raasclark Reaper Easy Tame or Reaper Easiest Tame Raasclark, something along those lines. And when you tame one of these things, you really won't regret it, as this is by far one of Ark's best tames in dealing damage and just in general use. It is one of the best combat creatures in the game, and it is just so powerful and so cool to ride. In at number 5 is the Rock Drake. Now this sadly is the last Arboration creature on this list. I know now there are 3 on the list, and yes, that is probably the most density of creatures from one map on this list. Arboration is definitely a really great map, and one you should check out if you have the time or the actual money to buy that DLC. Now, why would I put the Rock Drake above the Reaper in this list? Well, namely, it is just because the Rock Drake is significantly better at travelling around the Arboration map, and it will just be a much more useful creature on Arboration and other maps as well, where there are some heights where the Rock Drake has a lot of things to grab onto. And it actually is pretty great on Gen 2 as well, with the likes of the Maywing being another great glider as well. Except the Rock Drake, unlike the Maywing, can scale walls and vertical surfaces, which sadly the Maywing lacks, like I've said, which actually makes the Rock Drake somewhat of a better travel mount. But not when it comes into speed, but the Rock Drake is still an incredibly fast creature, and it can even dash onto walls as well if you're close enough. In terms of its damage as well, it does a really nice healthy amount of damage, which is extremely useful when you're traveling, and if you run into any kind of threat, you can just quickly get rid of it. You can easily kill Gigas with something like a Rock Drake. They have so much power, and a very decent health stat on top of that as well. Their weight is pretty reasonable, although you're probably not going to be transporting loads of metal with these things, but I don't know. On Arboration, I've done that a few times, and other people definitely have. But its main thing is also that its stamina drain is so little, which is so good for a flyer, and so opposite to what the Pteranodon is going to deliver you. In at number 4 is the Astrodelphis. Now, earlier on the list, we always had the Arboration creatures, but now you're going to run into a lot of Gen 2 creatures, as they are absolutely insane DLC creatures, as Gen 2 is really a map of just giving OP creatures and OP things, and the Astrodelphis is no exception at all. This thing is an absolutely insane creature with also insane requirements as well, with its saddle being locked in the 120s or 110s, which is higher than the standard survivor level, so you'll need to do transfers to actually get to that level, or you may be able to get to that on Gen 2, but I'm not quite sure. There may be something that you can do if you defeat the bosses and then you level up from there, but I'm not quite sure on that. There'll probably be something like that. I know on the island, if you do the Overseer, you can get up to level 115, and I think the saddle is about that level, so you might be able to do some of the bosses on Gen 2 and get it to that, but the saddle is definitely a hard thing to get. But once tamed, you do have yourself an absolutely insane creature capable of pretty much defeating anyone in a PvP scenario, due to its ultimate speed, acrobatics, agility, and also insane damage as well, as this thing can shoot lasers and it runs on element, which may be expensive, but Gen 2 has an abundance of element, so it really won't be a problem. In at number 3 is the Bloodstalker. Now, keeping with the Genesis theme, albeit not Gen 2 theme, even though this does spawn on Gen 2, it still came out on Gen 1, we have the Bloodstalker, obviously coming out in Gen 1 in the Bog biome. And what a biome that is, full of great tames but also a lot of annoyances. The Bog biome is one of Ark's most hostile and just most infuriating biomes, as pretty much everything from the insect swarms to the Capros to the Sarcos to the Spinos just wants you dead and will always ruin your day. I would definitely recommend going to the Ocean biome if you're starting on Gen 1 and building your base on some of those land island things, and you will have a significantly better time. Except resources may be a little tight for you, but it shouldn't be too bad, and then you can go to the Bog biome, tame yourself a Bloodstalker, and then you have really great travel. As on Gen 1, this is pretty much your only shout for travel. It is an absolutely insane travel mount, and it is actually really cool to ride this thing as well, as you kind of feel a bit like Spider-Man. Yes, the Bloodstalker is a very difficult tame to actually learn efficiently, and I am not the best out there at flying this thing. I'm not really that great, but I have done the Bog mission on Alpha, so at least I do have credit for that. And that is something that you'll probably want to do on Genesis Part 1, as you do need to do missions to actually defeat the final boss on the map, and missions are going to get you hexagons, and hexagons are very valuable on Gen 1, and are basically essential to completing Gen 1, and will really help you along the way. So at some point, learn to use the Bloodstalker, and even not on Gen 1, it is really useful. In at number 2 is the Maywing, yet again with another Gen 2 creature, meaning the creature in number 1 is also a Gen 2 tame as well, but you'll have to wait to see what that is. In terms of the Maywing's skills and abilities, this is by far the best travel mount in Ark in terms of speed. This thing just goes so fast and so rapid. This thing is like absolutely insane for traveling across the map. It is so cool how fast the thing can traverse across the map. And when I first saw it, I didn't even really know what to think. And it is great on the water too, as it can skim along the water like the Bloodstalker can hover over the surface of water. Except sadly this thing isn't really that great under the water, but it isn't going to be too bad. But the Maiming does have a wealth of other uses as well, apart from its insane travelling skills. Namely, this thing is great for raising creatures, as it is essentially a portable feeding trough with all that milk coming out of it. It can also, with its saddle, steal enemy creatures and also carry your own baby creatures. Also, it can only steal enemy baby creatures. If it could steal all enemy creatures, that would be a little too OP. And if you're tight on berries, this thing can gather berries too. And finally, in at number 1 is the Shadowmane. Yes, another Gen 2 creature, like I said, like you all suspected from back further in the list. And in my opinion, the Shadowmane is Ark's best DLC creature. It is packed with so many features, like being able to jump incredible heights and over really long distances. Also, over time, it can charge up its damage as well, dealing an insane amount of damage all in one strike. And on top of that, it has the hydration buff, which it shares with the Spino, and it also has pack and alpha buffs on top of that. The Shadowmane is just such an OP creature, and it can even turn invisible as well, like what the Rock Drake can do, which can be very useful in a PvP scenario if it weren't for the footprints it leaves behind. Also, the Shadowmane is great in the water too, and there is pretty much no environment the Shadowmane can't traverse and really get through quickly and efficiently. Its only real downside obviously is its absolutely annoying taming method, requiring you to feed the Shadowmane live fish without waking it sleep. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I hope you enjoyed. Also, comment down below your top 10 favourite Ark DLC creatures, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.